All right. Well, I hope you appreciate the North Carolina weather that I brought up here. Last week, I spent the whole week in Florida, 80 degrees, and I was thinking I'm going to have to wear my overcoat if I go to Boston area. And I checked the weather, and I thought, it's the same up there as it is down here in North Carolina. So, great to be with you tonight. I want to tell you up front what I hope is going to happen in the brief time that we spend together. My first desire is that if you are married, your marriage will get better. Would that be okay with you? Marriages either get better or they get worse. They never stand still. And I certainly hope your marriage will not get worse because I came. I hope it'll get better. And I hope if you have children, your relationship with your children will get better. And if you're single, I hope that all of your relationships will get better. My second desire is that you will learn some things that you will find so helpful, you'll want to share them with your friends who are not here tonight, but who desperately need help. And they talk to you 2 years before they talk to a counselor. And if you have any idea how to help them, you can help them. My third desire is that we can have a little fun while we do this. Now, I meet people who don't believe in fun, but I hope we can have a little fun while we do it, okay? All right. I want to talk in this first session about the most important word in the English language. And also the most confusing word. I say it's the most important word because if you examine our literature, our music, our movies, our religions, you find that love is a central theme in all of them. And for those who are Christians, Jesus once said, this is the way that they will know that you're following me by the way you love each other. In other words, he gave the non-Christian world the right to judge whether or not we're true Christians by the way we love. That makes it exceedingly important. But I say love is the most confusing word because we use the word love in 1,000 ways. We say, for example, I love hot dogs. Or in North Carolina, where I live, we say, I love barbecue. And in North Carolina, that's always pork barbecue. Then I hear people say, I love the mountains. I love the beach. I love my new car. I love my dog. And then we say to a special someone, what is that supposed to mean? Hot dogs and barbecue. I'm not going to talk about 1,000 ways that we use the word love. I'm going to talk only about 3 ways that we use the word love. And I'm going to focus on the third of these. So, if I could get the flipper, I just remembered I didn't bring it up here, so if you'll hand it to me, that would be absolutely wonderful, okay? And if you can put us on the first slide there of understanding love, that would be wonderful. All right. The first kind of love I want to talk about is what we typically call falling in love. I doubt that you've ever heard a lecture on falling in love. And yet, we talk about it all the time. We certainly experience it, to be sure. But this kind of love actually begins with a feeling. There's something about the way they look, the way they talk, the way they emote, that just gives you an emotional tingle inside. And you want to see them again. And every time you see them, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And eventually, it becomes an emotional obsession. You literally cannot get them off your mind. You go to bed thinking about them. You wake up thinking about them. All day long, you think about them. They are the most wonderful person you have ever met in your life. Now, your mother can see their flaws. Your mother will say, honey, have you considered they haven't had a steady job in 5 years? And you will say, Mama, they're just waiting for the right opportunity. So you see, this actually, it starts with a feeling, and it gets to be an obsession. But what no one ever told me is that obsession has an average lifespan of 2 years. Some a little longer, some a little less, average 2 years. See, I was always told if you got the real thing, it's going to last forever. And I went to my mother before I got married, and I said, Mama, how do you know when you're really in love? And my mother said what many mothers have said. She said, son, if it's real, you'll know it. I like my mother. That didn't help me at all. And the fact is, we don't help young people very much. Everybody just assumes the main thing to be certain of before you get married is that you're in love, but nobody tells you how to figure it out. You know, sometimes when young couples have come to me through the years for premarital counseling, I will just ask, now, why do you all want to get married? And whatever else they say, they always give me the big reason. And the big reason is always the same. We love each other. Isn't that sweet? And then I ask them a very unfair question. I say, tell me, what do you mean by that? And that's when they reach over and hold hands, look around the ceiling and start giggling, and then look back at me and say, oh, you know. So we don't talk about it much, but we all experience it sooner or later. Most people do fall in love sometime through, the journey. But my wife and I dated 2 years before we got married. I came down pretty soon after the honeymoon. And nobody told me that you do come down. I thought if you had the real thing, it was going to last forever. So we came down, and we had conflicts. And when you're in love, you don't think you'll have any conflicts. Because when you're in love, whatever she wants to do is fine. Whatever he wants to do is fine. And we came down off the high, and everything that my mother told me about her was true. And I'm sure everything her mother told her about me was true. And we didn't know how to solve conflicts, so we ended up arguing. Because I knew I was right, and she knew she was right. And we argued, trying to convince each other. I remember one night it was pouring down rain outside. And in the middle of an argument, my wife just walked out the front door into the rain. And I thought, oh man, this is bad. When a woman walks out in the rain, it's bad. And, we struggled for a long, long time in our marriage. And I'll share a little bit about what happened later. But later in my life, when I was counseling couples, I found out that was not unique to us. A whole lot of people had arguments and conflicts and didn't know how to solve conflicts. And when they came down off the high, they also argued. And I don't have to tell you, a lot of them decided to call it quits and walk out. Because, see, here's the reality. You can fall in love after you're married with somebody else. Things aren't going well in the marriage. All we do is argue, or maybe we just stay away from each other. And in fact, it started this morning somewhere. A husband in that kind of marriage went to work. He did what he does every morning when he went to work. He went to the coffee pot. But this morning, there was a lady at the coffee pot. And she said to him, good morning. Ooh, kindest word he's heard in months. Good morning. 8:30 in the morning, and her hair is combed. And she smells good. And right away, he feels a tingle. So about 10:30, he sees her going for coffee, and he gets thirsty. Are you new around here? Where are you from? Oh, my friend, he used to work over there. Little coffee pot conversation. And the next few days, he arranges for a few more coffee pot rendezvous. And if he thinks that she might be feeling what he's feeling, he will say to her, how about lunch someday? And if she agrees, many times on that first lunch, he will tell her what it's like at his house, just so she knows where he's coming from, married but unhappy. And the second lunch, she may well tell him her story. And then if he thinks she's interested, he will say, how about dinner some night? And if she agrees, he'll take her to a nice restaurant, one that has fresh flowers and candles on every table. I'm talking nice restaurant. And many times after that first dinner, they have a little after-dinner rendezvous. Ooh. And a few more dinners, and he's saying to himself, oh man, I don't want to hurt our kids. And then he says, but you know, it couldn't be good for the kids to be in our marriage and see the way we treat each other. You know that couldn't be good for the kids. And a few weeks later, he says to himself, a man's got to do what a man's got to do. So he goes home and tells his wife that he doesn't love her anymore. He's moving out. But you see, nobody told him either that the new tingle also has a 2-year lifespan. And he will come down off the high again. And research clearly indicates divorces in second marriages are higher than divorces in first marriage. And third marriages, the divorce rate's even higher. Folks, the answer is not running. The answer is learning how to love the person to whom you're now married. Now look, I'm not here to condemn anybody. I know in a group this size, we have people who have been married once, twice, 3 times, maybe 4 times. I had a guy tell me something just not long ago. He said, Dr. Chapman, I believe in marriage. He said, I believe in marriage strongly. So I've been married 4 times. Look, folks, we are where we are, okay? We can't change history, but we can change the future. So my hope is that wherever you are in the journey, that tonight's going to help you, if you're married, have the kind of marriage you wanted to have all along, one that's loving and supportive and caring for each other, okay? All right, so that's the falling in love thing. Now, the second kind of love is not nearly as exciting, but ultimately far more important, and that is love as an attitude. That doesn't do much for you, does it? An attitude is a fixed way of thinking. And the love as an attitude is, I'm out to enrich your life. I want to help you become the person you believe that God wants you to become. It's an attitude. And here's the good thing. We choose our attitude. We don't choose our emotions. You don't choose to fall in love. You don't get up one day and say, I think I'll go fall in love with somebody today. No. It just happens. It starts with a feeling. You didn't make it happen. But this kind of love, we choose. And every single day, we choose our attitude. We either choose to treat our spouse in terms of enriching their lives, doing anything we can to help them and become the person they want to become, or we choose a selfish attitude. And in fact, by nature, all of us are selfish. Now, there's a good part to being self-centered in that we feed ourselves, we get the sleep, and we take care of ourselves, and we get the exercise. There's a good part to that, of being egocentric. But when it becomes a way of life, and our way of life is, in everything I'm doing, what am I going to get out of it? And a person who's selfish is the opposite of a person who is loving. And we choose either to be selfish or we choose to have an attitude of love. And that impacts everything else that we do. So if we choose the attitude of love, we are thinking in terms of how can I enrich the life of the other person. And if we really have an attitude of love in all of life, we're thinking in terms of how can I enrich the life of everyone that I encounter. Imagine what would happen in this country if a significant number of people had that attitude. That whatever happens today, with the help of God, I want to seek to enrich the lives of the people that I encounter. I wrote a book some years ago called Love is a Way of Life, in which I asked thousands of people all over the country, could you give me the name of a loving person in your family or in your circle of friends? And if they did, I said, why? What is it about them that makes you say that they're a loving person? And the answers came up with like 7 traits of love, 7 that, and I was raising the question in that book way back then. I don't remember what year that was, but is there still a significant number of people in our country who have an attitude of love and who have those traits? And what would happen if that did happen, and we did have that? So we choose our attitude, and this has a tremendous effect in terms of our marriage and our relationship with our children and everybody else. I'm not going to talk much more about that. We preach this kind of love in churches. We do preach this kind of love. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. So I'm not going to spend too much time here. I'll come back to it in a moment, however. But I want to focus on the third kind of love. and that is love as an emotional need. Almost everyone agrees that one of our deepest emotional needs on the human level is the need to feel loved by the significant people in our lives. I like to picture that inside every child, there's an emotional love tank. And if that love tank is full, if the child genuinely feels loved by the parents, the child grows up emotionally healthy. But if the love tank is empty and that child does not feel loved, the child will grow up with many internal emotional struggles. And in the teenage years, they will likely go looking for love, often in all the wrong places. But I believe that adults also have a love tank. And if you're married, the person you would most like to love you is your spouse. In fact, if you feel loved by your spouse, life is beautiful. But if the love tank is empty and you feel like they don't love me, they wish they weren't married to me, life begins to look pretty dark. And just as much of the misbehavior of children grows out of an empty love tank, much of the misbehavior of adults grows out of an empty love tank. You see, the husband who is in a marriage over here, when he has an empty love tank and all they do is argue with each other or just stay away from each other, is far more tempted at the coffee pot with those feelings than the husband whose love tank is full here. And that doesn't explain his behavior. I'm just saying emotionally, he's much more tempted in that area to go find love somewhere else. So, I want to talk about this kind of love. How do we keep the love tank full in a marriage after we come down off the high? And how can we be certain that we're filling the love tank of our children so that they grow up feeling love? The difficulty in doing this is that we have made the assumption that what makes one person feel loved makes another person feel loved. And that's a false assumption. Never forget the day I first encountered this many, many years ago in my office. A couple came in, I didn't know them, I'd never met them. They sat down, and I found out later they'd been married to each other for 30 years. She started talking immediately. She said, Dr. Chapman, before we start, let me just tell you a little bit about us. She said, we don't argue. We don't believe in arguing. We don't have any money problems. She said, I was reading an article that said money was the biggest problem in marriage. She said, not for us. And she went on with 2 or 3 more positive things, and I was beginning to wonder, did they come in here to tell me what a good marriage they had? But then she started crying. And she said, but Dr. Chapman, the problem is, I just don't feel any love coming from him. We're like roommates, living in the same house. He does his thing, I do my thing. There's nothing going on between us. And I just feel so empty inside. And she said, I don't know how long I can go on like this. Well, I looked over at her husband, and he said, I don't understand her. I do everything I can to show her that I love her. She sits there and tells you what she's been telling me. She doesn't feel loved. He said, I don't know what else to do. I said, well, what do you do to show your love to her? He said, well, I get home from work before she does, so I start the evening meal. He said, some nights I have it ready when she gets home. If not, she'll help me. And then after we eat, he said, I wash the dishes. And he said, every Thursday night I vacuum the floor. And every Saturday I wash the car, I mow the grass, I help her with the laundry. And he went on, and I was beginning to wonder, what does this woman do? It sounded to me like he was doing everything. And he said, I do all of that. And she says she doesn't feel loved. He said, I don't know what else to do. Well, I looked back at her, and she started crying again. And she said, Dr. Chapman, he's right. He's a hard-working man. She said, but we don't ever talk. We haven't talked in 20 years. He's always mowing the grass, washing the dishes. You understand what's going on? A sincere husband who is doing everything he knows to do to show his wife that he loves her, and a wife who doesn't get it. And after that, I heard similar stories over and over in my office. And I knew there had to be a pattern to all of this, but I had no idea what it was. But eventually I took time to sit down and read several years of notes that I made when I was counseling and ask myself the question, when someone said in my office, I feel like my spouse doesn't love me, what did they want? What were they complaining about? And their answers fell into 5 categories. And I later called them the 5 love languages. And I started using that in my counseling. If you want her to feel love, you've got to learn to express love in her language. And if you want him to feel love, you've got to learn to express love in his language. And I started using this in my counseling. And I would help couples discover each other's love language, challenge them to go home and try it. And sometimes they would come back in 3 weeks and say, Gary, this is changing everything. The whole climate's different now. And then I started using it in small groups. And the same thing would happen. Probably 5 years later, I thought, you know, if I could put this concept in a book and write it in the language of the common person, leave out the psychological jargon, maybe I could help a lot of couples that I would never have time to see in my office. Little did I know that that book would sell now over 20 million copies and be translated, as they say, in over 50 languages. People have said to me, Gary, how do you explain that? The book's been out now 30 years, and every year it sells more than it did the year before. That doesn't happen to books. And people say, how do you explain that? And my answer is, I said, well, the short answer is God. And the long answer is God. I mean, that's all I know. But I think what has happened on the human level is that couples read it and the lights come on and they realize how they've missed each other and why they've missed each other. And then they take the quiz and they learn each other's language and they start speaking the right language and the love tank fills up. And then they want their brother and his wife to read it and their sister and her husband, and it's gone word of mouth all over the world. So I'm going to share with you the 5 love languages. If you've read the book, it'll be a review. Get it back on the front burner. If you haven't read the book, it'll be an introduction, okay? And these are in no particular order. And incidentally, all of these are found in the Bible. Which leads me to say this. If you discover something in social research about relationships, if it's true, it'll be illustrated in the Bible because truth never contradicts truth. So let me share these with you. First, and these are in no particular order, but words of affirmation. 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 1 simply says, love builds up, love edifies. So one way to express love is to use words that build up. You look nice in that outfit. I really appreciate what you did. You know, one of the things I like about you? It's just looking for things that you can genuinely affirm the other person for. Words of affirmation. There's an ancient Hebrew proverb that says life and death is in the power of the tongue. You can kill your spouse and you can kill your children by words. Or you can give life to your spouse. Or you can give life to kids. Words are powerful. Now, I had a lady some time ago said to me, she said, Gary, I know it would be good if I could give my husband some positive words. She said, but to be honest with you, I can't think of anything good to say about the man. And I said, well, does he ever take a shower? She said, well, yes. I said, well, how often? She said, well, every day. I said, if I were you, I'd start there. Honey, I appreciate you taking a shower. I said, there are men who don't. I've never met a man, I've never met a woman, you couldn't find something good to say about them. I mean, just think about it. I tell you what, for those of you that are sitting with your spouse, guys, why don't you just turn to her right now and say, honey, one of the things I appreciate about you is, just tell her something. If you're by yourself, you just take a break. And then, ladies, maybe you could reciprocate. Maybe the ladies could say that, huh? Yes, tell him one thing you appreciate about him. Yeah. One lady said to me after I did this, she came up to me and said, Dr. Chapman, you know what he said. He said he appreciated me picking up sticks in the front yard. She said, don't you think he would think of something better than that? I said, honey, he only had 30 seconds to think. I mean, just accept it, you know? Words of affirmation. Powerful, powerful. And then a second love language is gifts. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. You know, in Ephesians 5 and verse 25, where it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. The greatest gift God ever gave is when Christ paid our penalty on the cross. You think he's not talking about the tingles. He's not talking about, have the tingles for your wife like Christ has the tingles for the church. He's talking about this. You have the same attitude toward her that Christ had toward the church. And he gave himself totally for the church. So the greatest gift. In fact, the Bible says all great gifts come down from God. God is a gift-giving God. And the gifts don't have to be expensive. Haven't we always said it's the thought that counts? But I remind you, it's not the thought left in your head that counts. It's the gift that came out of the thought in your head. Guys, you can get flowers free even here in New England in the middle of the summer. Just go out in your backyard and pick one. That's what your kids do. How many mothers have ever received a dandelion from your kids? Yeah. Kids sees it, they're fascinated by it, they give it to mama. Now, if you don't have any flowers in your backyard, check out your neighbor's yard. Don't steal them, but if you see a nice flower in their yard, you just say to them, hey man, can I give you $5 for that flower? My wife loves those kind of flowers. Good. I almost guarantee you say, oh man, I don't want your money, take the flower. Or you could go to a funeral. I did that not long ago. I was out at the cemetery, and service was over, and family was leaving, and there was flowers on the casket. As some of the family was leaving, they were pulling out roses. And one of them said to me, Dr. Chapman, would you like to have a rose? I said, I certainly would, thank you. Took that thing home, gave it to my wife. I told her where I got it. She still liked it. You can pick up a stone in a city parking lot and take it home to an 8-year-old boy and say, hey, man, I found this today, and I thought about you. Look at the colors in here, man. I want you to have it. If gifts is his love language, you'll find that stone in his dresser drawer when he's 23, and he'll remember the day you gave it to him. I had a man say to me the other day, he said, Doc Chapman, I was taking a walk, and I saw a bird feather, and I picked it up. He said, my wife's language is gifts, and I just picked it up, brushed it off, took it home. I said, honey, when I was walking this morning, I found this bird feather, and I want to give it to you because it reminded me that you are the wind beneath my wings. And she said, oh, that is so sweet. Didn't cost him a penny. It's just thinking. He gave her a gift and words of affirmation. And then there's acts of service. Acts of service. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 18 says, love not only in words, but in deeds. Do something to show your love. Now, in a marriage, this is such things as cooking a meal. As a matter of fact, that is a huge act of service, cooking a meal. Anybody here still cook? Yeah, some of you. My son didn't get married until he was 34. People would ask him, when are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? He would say, when you grow up in the home of a marriage counselor, you're very careful. But eventually he got married, and he came home and he said, Dad, I got a bonus when I married Amy. I said, really? He said, yeah, Dad, she likes to cook. I never thought I'd find a girl in my generation likes to cook. And then my daughter married a man that likes to cook. My kids got him made on the cooking deal. Washing dishes is an act of service. Who does that at your place? Put them in the dishwasher and all that good stuff. Yeah. Taking out the trash is an act of service. Yeah. Mowing the grass is an act of service. Who does it or pays to get it done? Yeah. Washing the car, running it through the car wash is an act of service. Changing the baby's diaper. Woo, big act of service. Remember the old saying, actions speak louder than words. If this is their love language, that's true. It's not true for everyone. But if this is their love language, actions will speak louder than words. So, number 4 is quality time, by which I mean you give them your undivided attention. Mark chapter 3 and verse 14 says of Jesus, he ordained 12. We call them the 12 disciples. Now listen to what he said, what it says, that he might be with them and then send them forth to preach. Jesus preached to multitudes. He gave quality time to 12 men. They hung out together. They were together for hours and hours and hours and hours, listening, and he was interfacing with them. Now, in a marriage, I'm not talking about husband and wife sitting on the couch watching television. Someone else has your attention. I'm talking about sitting down with the TV off, the computer down. We're not answering the phone, and we're looking at each other, and we're talking back and forth and sharing back and forth our ideas, our thoughts, what's going on in our lives. Or you don't have to always be sitting down. You could be taking a walk down the road and talking, or going out to eat, assuming that you talk. We've all seen this in the restaurant. Husband and wife sitting across from the table, looking at each other, but they both got their phone out, looking at their phone. Now, maybe they're going to show them a photo. Okay, that's fine. I understand that. Maybe they want to read something to them. I understand that. But sometimes they're responding to their text messages. That's not quality time. You're in proximity of each other, but it's not quality time. And you don't always have to be talking. Maybe she wants a little flower garden in the front yard, and you're out there giving your full attention with her, doing something that she wants you to do, but you're giving your full attention to that because it's what she wants to do. Or the same thing with her. Maybe she goes to a car race with him. She's never understood what's the deal. Those cars going, whoa, 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 whoa. But he loves it, so he wants her to go with him, and so she goes with him and gives her undivided attention. At least for 10 minutes. Quality time. Can I just throw this in with your children? If you're talking to your child and your phone rings and you answer the phone, you've communicated to that child, somebody out there is more important than you. I know that's not what we're thinking, but that's what we're communicating. Now, I know if you're on call, a policeman, a fireman, you're on call, I understand that. You just tell the child, honey, this is an emergency, I have to take it, but stay right here. I want to finish our conversation. Quality time with our children. So important if this is their language. I mean, it's important for all kids, but if that's their language, it's super, super important. Quality time. The lady who said, we don't ever talk, she did not mean they didn't discuss logistics. Who's going to pick up the kids or what restaurant you want to go to. No. She meant we don't ever sit down and look at each other and share our thoughts and share our feelings with each other. One of the things I challenge couples to do is have a daily sit down and listen time. It can be 15 minutes. A daily sit down and listen time. And as a minimum, honey, just tell me 3 things that happened in your life today and how you feel about them. So he says, well, honey, one thing, I stopped and got gas on the way home. And she said, how do you feel about that? He said, to tell you the truth, I felt angry because it didn't click off and it was supposed to click off and it put the gas off. That's nice to know. He had an experience like that today. Yeah, so just imagine that. If you just every day, I mean, we spend more time apart, most of us apart during the day than we do together. I mean, I know COVID kind of put us together. But I wrote a book during COVID, 5 Simple Ways to Strengthen Your Marriage When You're Stuck at Home Together. But anyway, giving that person some quality time every day so we stay connected to each other. Otherwise, we don't know what's going on in each other's heart and mind. And what desire do you have? You know, what are your thoughts? What are your opinions on this, that, or the other thing? Just undivided attention. And then physical touch. We've long known the emotional power of physical touch. That's why we pick up babies and hold them and kiss them and cuddle them. And long before the baby understands the meaning of the word love, the baby feels love by physical touch. Mark chapter 10, Jesus was speaking to multitudes, and people started bringing their children to Jesus. And his disciples actually rebuked them and said, no, this is for adults. And Jesus heard that, and he said, oh, hey guys, bring the little children to me, for of such is the kingdom of God. And the next verse says he put his hands on them and blessed them. In fact, if you follow Jesus' lifestyle, he was touching people. So, physical touch. In a marriage, we're talking about such things as holding hands, kissing, embracing, the whole sexual part of marriage, arm around the shoulder. Driving down the road, you put your hand on their leg. Sitting around the house and they walk by and you trip them. I'm kidding. Don't trip your spouse, okay? Now listen to me carefully. Out of those 5 love languages, each of us has a primary love language. One of the 5 speaks more deeply to us emotionally than the other 4. Now we can receive love in all 5. But if we don't receive love in our primary love language, we will not feel loved, even though the other person's speaking some of the other languages. It's very similar to spoken language. Every one of us grew up speaking a language, either Greek or French. We remember that? We all grew up speaking a language with a dialect. And that's the one we understand best because it's our native tongue. I grew up speaking English, Southern style. That's why some of you along the way have been saying, what did he say? What did he say? But all of us grew up with a language and a dialect. And the same thing is true with the love languages. All of us grew up with a love language. So, the key then, let me say this first. Almost never does a husband and wife have the same love language. It does happen, but not very often. And when it happens, they will likely have a different dialect within that language. For example, one lady said to me, Dr. Chapman, my husband and I have the same love language. I said, wonderful, what is it? She said, acts of service. But she said, the things I want him to do for me that make me feel loved are different from the things he wants me to do to make him feel loved. Understand? Same language, just different dialects. And by nature, we speak our own love language. If we don't know anything about love languages, then we will share love to the other person in the way that we would like to receive love. So for example, when we first got married, before I came down off the high and we had the arguments, I gave my wife words of affirmation. I told her how nice she looked, how much I appreciate what she did. I'm so glad I married you, honey. And I probably told her a dozen times a day, I love you. I love you, love you, love you. And one night she said to me, you keep on saying I love you. If you love me, why don't you help me? I said, what do you mean? She said, well, you don't ever offer to wash dishes or vacuum the floor or clean the toilet. You mean you don't offer to do anything. I didn't say this, but I was thinking inside, woman, what are you talking about? My mama did that. We bring our history with us. We expect her to do what my mama did. You know, it's the same way the other way. You're not married to your mama. So what you want to find out? You see, I didn't know anything about love languages, but she was crying out, telling me her love language. It was acts of service. I was giving her words. It was acts of service. Incidentally, in that same period, she wasn't giving me any words of affirmation. I guess she figured I wasn't worthy of any. I wasn't doing anything. But I told her, I said, well, honey, yeah, I mean, I can wash dishes. I mean, my mama taught me that. You know, my sister did them one night, and I did them one night. I said, but I don't know how to clean the toilet. And she said, well, I can teach you. You know? But when I started doing those things, she started giving me words of affirmation. You see, people had good marriages before I wrote the 5 love languages, folks. But what they did is what we did. They stumbled upon what made the other person feel loved. And so they were expressing love in a way that was meaningful to the other person. See? So, obviously then, the answer is we must learn to speak the love language of the other person. Now, somebody says, yeah, Gary, but now wait a minute. What if the love language of the other person is something that just doesn't come natural for you? And my answer, so we learn it. See, I had a man say to me, he said, Dr. Chapman, my wife and I read your book, and we took the quiz. And her love language, she tells me, is acts of service. But I'm going to tell you and her, if it's going to take my washing dishes and my vacuuming floors for her to feel loved, she can forget that. And I said, that's your choice. Love is a choice. If you choose to live with a wife who has an empty love tank, that's your choice. I said, I much prefer to live with a wife who has a full love tank. I said, my wife's language is also acts of service. I said, that's why I do wash dishes. I do vacuum floors. I do take out the trash. And my wife tells me I'm the greatest husband in the world. And I know that's hyperbole. It feels good to me. You see, this is where the attitude comes in. See, he had an attitude. I'm not going to do certain things. Okay, if you want to live with a spouse who has an empty love tank, okay, that's your choice. So it's a choice. Now, I also have people who say to me, Dr. Chapman, I don't know how to do it. In fact, I had a man say to me not long ago, he said, Dr. Chapman, he said, my wife and I read the book, we took the quiz, her language is words of affirmation. I don't know how to say things like that. He said, I never received any words of affirmation growing up. All I ever heard was how bad I was never going to amount to anything. And he said, I don't know how you say words. I said, well, you are where you are. Folks, we all where we are. If you grew up in a home where you didn't receive words of affirmation, okay, that's where you are. I said, but you can learn. As an adult, you can learn, even though you didn't receive them growing up. I said, listen, could you tell me 3 things that your wife is good at? And he thought a minute, and I wrote them down. He said, well, she's a good cook, and she's a good school teacher, and she's a good mother. I wrote them down. And then out beside each one of them, I wrote a sentence or 2. Like on the cooking, I said, honey, I haven't told you this, but I really appreciate all the meals that you cook. You're a great cook. And then I wrote 2 or 3 sentences out beside each one of them. I said, now here's your assignment. You go home this week, and twice a day, you stand in front of a mirror, and you read these things out loud. So you hear yourself saying these things twice a day, okay? And then you come back. And I want to see when you come back if you can say them without looking at the paper. So he came back. I said, okay, can you say them? And he did. I said, now here's your assignment. This week, well, no, I said, the next 3 weeks, I want you to take one of these each week, and you just give her one compliment every week for 3 weeks, okay? Okay, he said, I'll try. He came back. I said, did you do it? He said, yeah. I said, how'd she respond? He said, well, on the 3rd week, she said to me, what's going on with you? I have never heard you give me so many compliments. And I said, what did you say? He said, I just said, honey, I'm trying to learn how to communicate to you how much I love you. And she said, oh, that is so wonderful. I love you too. You see, folks, we can learn to speak the language of our spouse. And we can learn to speak the language of our children. I remember a man who said to me, Dr. Chapman, my wife and I read your book, The 5 Love Languages of Children, and my 10-year-old son, his love language is physical touch. But Dr. Chapman, I have never hugged him, and I can't imagine walking up and hugging him. I was never hugged growing up by my mom or my daddy. And I said again, okay, you are where you are. I said, but you can learn. You can learn. I said, come up here and stand beside me. I was in my office. I said, take your right hand and hit me on the shoulder. Just easy, kind of hit me. You know. He said, really? I said, yeah. I said, now that's your assignment this week. You just go home, and sometime during the week, you walk up to your son and just hit him on the shoulder. I said, you can hit him and run if you want to. Next week, he came back, and he had done that. I said, okay, come up here. I said, now hit me again, just like you did last week. I said, now, after you hit me, give me 2 little pats on the back. So he did. I said, that's your assignment this week. He came back. Yeah, I did it, Dr. Chapman. I just went step by step like that. Never forget the day I got to the place, and I said, okay, man, this is the week. Come up here and stand in front of me. Look at me. I said, now hug me. He said, Dr. Chapman, really? I said, yeah, man. I said, yeah, just hug me. His arms were like lead. But he finally got them up. And I was waiting for him to step, half a step toward me. And he didn't. So I just reached out and grabbed him, pulled him in, held him. And then when I got him, he put his arms around me and he hugged me. And I said, okay, man, if you can hug me, you can hug your son. This is the week. You just walk up to him and hug him. He came back. I said, did you do it? He said, yeah, Dr. Chapman, I did it. I did it. I said, okay, if you can do it once, if you can do it this week, you can do it next week. And if you do it 2 weeks, you can do it 3 weeks. And if you do it 3 weeks, you can do it 4 weeks. And I said, you can come to the place where every day before he leaves to go to school, you can hug him. And he did. See, folks, we can learn to speak any of these if we have the attitude of love. So, you understand why I would say that what I've shared with you has the potential for saving thousands of marriages. In fact, I do Saturday marriage seminars all over the country. Every Saturday, I have half a dozen people at least come up and say, Dr. Chapman, we just wanted to tell you that book saved our marriage. We were at the point of divorce, and somebody gave us that book, and the lights came on. And we took the test, and we started speaking it, and it absolutely saved our marriage. See, all of us so desperately need to feel loved that when the spouse starts speaking it in the right language, the love tank begins to fill up. Powerful, powerful, powerful. All right, I'm going to just share with you a few of the books they've got out there. Now, they've got some good books out there, some that I wrote, some I didn't write. But here's the original book. If you've never read it, I want to encourage you to read it. The stories in there will really move your heart. If you've read it, this will be a good time to get one for your brother and his wife, okay? And all the books they're selling out there, they're selling them at a discount, so they're out there. And then this was the second book in the series, The 5 Love Languages of Children, How to Effectively Love Children. So if you have children still at home, or you have grandchildren who are still in like elementary school. And then the third was The 5 Love Languages of Teenagers. Because people came to me and say, Dr. Chapman, we read your book on children, and it was so wonderful, it's helped us so much, but now our child's become a teenager, and we're doing the same thing, and it's not working. And they asked me, does their love language change when they get to be teenagers? And my answer is, I don't think the love language changes, but you have to learn new dialects, because what you've been doing, they now see as childish. So if you've been going out on the field after the game and hugging them, when they're kids, they love it. When they be teenagers, they're going to push you away. No, don't do it out here. They still need hugged, but in private. So if you have teenagers or grandchildren who are teenagers. And then there's one for the teenager. It's called A Teen's Guide to the 5 Love Languages. So imagine if your teenager was reading this and you were reading the one for parents, and then you discuss all this together. You're teaching your teenager something that's going to serve them well the rest of their life. Okay? And then the other one I want to mention is what I'm going to talk about next hour. That is the 5 apology languages. Because we have different ideas on what it means to apologize. We'll look at that later. And I noticed they had a few copies out there. We took the love languages to work. We call it the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. And the reason I wrote that book, I wrote it with a psychologist who spent 20 years in the business world. And what we discovered, and here's what motivated me, we discovered that 70% of the people who have a job in this country say they feel little to no appreciation at work. And 64% of the people who leave a job and go to another job say they left primarily because they didn't feel appreciated. So he went into businesses, all kind of businesses, gave them a job satisfaction test, and then shared this concept, but in the workplace. We call it appreciation in the workplace. And everybody took the quiz, and so that in the work group, they all learned each other's primary appreciation language. Went back a year later, gave another job satisfaction test, and in every case, it was statistically improved. So, that if you're in business, that can be a great help to you. Okay. All right. I got 4 minutes. I'll tell you one more story. I was sitting in my office on a Thursday, and my assistant said, there's a lady out here that wants to see you, and she doesn't have an appointment, but I said, well, I'm free. Send her in. She said, Dr. Chapman, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know you, and you don't know me. I'm going to be honest with you, she said. I've got an appointment later this afternoon with an attorney, and I'm going to file for divorce for my husband. And she said, I don't know why I'm here, but as I was driving by the church, something inside of me said, you should go in there and talk to Dr. Chapman. So I'm here. I said, well, why don't you sit down and tell me? So she shared the story. It's a pretty graphic story. He was a full-time mechanic, had a full-time job as a mechanic on cars. And in the back of the house, he had a little mechanic shop that every night after dinner, he'd go out there and work on people's cars on the side. And every Saturday, he went out there and worked all day. And Sunday, she said, he sleeps till noon, and he gets up, we have dinner, lunch, and said then he watches football all afternoon. And she said, that's it. There's nothing going on between us. We just live in the same house. He expects me to have his meals ready, expects me to have his clothes clean, expects me to have sex with him when he wants to, and there's nothing coming back to me. And I said, well, I'm very empathetic to what you're saying. And if I were in your shoes, I'd probably feel exactly like you feel. Folks, don't ever preach to people when they tell you their pain. You identify with their pain, because if you were there and you had their personality, you'd feel the same way they do. I said, but since you're here, and I explained to her the love language concept. And then I said, would you be open to doing a little experiment with me? If you and I can sit here and figure out your husband's love language, would you be willing once a week for 6 months to speak his love language, no matter how he responds? I said, if you will, I'll meet with you every 3 weeks, and we'll see how it goes. She said, well, maybe that's why I'm here. So she went in the next office and called the attorney and said, I want to cancel my appointment. I'm going to try to get some help on my marriage. But she said at the end, but keep my name on your list, because I'll probably be there in 6 months. That's where she was. She did. First 3 weeks, he didn't say a word. The next 3 weeks, he said, what's going on with you? She said, well, to be honest with you, I'm going over there trying to get some counseling to learn to be a better wife. I knew something was going on, he said. Slammed the door and went outside. Next 3 weeks, didn't say much. And then another 3 weeks, he said, I don't know what you're doing, but it's not going to work. She said, well, I told you what I'm doing. I'm trying to learn how to be a better wife. He said, well, it's not going to work. And then another 3 weeks. And then he said one night after dinner, he said, what you're doing is not fair. She said, what do you mean? She said, you know what I mean. He said, I'm not much of a husband to you. I don't deserve what you're doing. She said, well, I told you what I'm doing. Well, it was 4 months into this when one night he said to her, anything I can do to help you before I go out to the shop? She said, well, if you like. And she told him something, and he did it. And after that, every week, at least once a week, he would ask her after dinner, anything I can do to help you? And he would do it. At the end of 6 months, she said, Gary, if anyone had ever told me that I could have love feelings for him again, I would have said it cannot happen. But she said, I do, Dr. Chapman. He's doing everything I asked him to do. I never met her husband, but one of our men at the church was over there at his shop one time, and somehow the subject came up. And he asked this member of our church, he said, do you know Dr. Chapman? He said, yeah, man, he's on our staff. He's a counselor. He said, that man is a miracle worker. He said, that man changed my life. I am not a miracle worker, but love works miracles. So, all right. Next.